Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another podcast. And tonight I have a friend of mine, Thomas Lorini. Thomas, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Alex, pleasure to be here.
And I invited Thomas on because I believe Thomas tries to live without regrets. Just like all the guests I have on, I believe he's striving for this in his own life, and that he wants to have impact. Thomas wants to have massive impact on others. From what I know of him, this is what I believe to be true. So, Thomas, welcome. Why don't you give everyone a little bit of background? Who you are, what do you do?
Sure. First of all, thank you for having me here, Alex. We've kind of been in each other's world over the past couple of years through social media, through some networks and stuff. But we recently connected in person last year, back in I think it was Niagara Falls. So I'm happy to see you launching this podcast and interviewing all these different guests. It's really cool. It's really cool to see, and it's a really interesting topic. Regrets in general. It's one of those things for myself. It's not something I think about consciously on a day-to-day level, but it's something to, I think, at times to stop and think. And perhaps during this session that we have, certain things will come up because we're purposefully discussing this and kind of allowing ourselves to go somewhere. I know for myself, I don't go very often. But in terms of my background, I'm born and raised in Toronto, and lived my life in the GTA. Went to school for mechanical engineering. The oldest of three, and got into real estate about 15 years ago. Got married about 13 years ago, and got three kids. Married with three kids. Been living in Southern California for 9 years, and I'm a dual citizen. And over the past number of years, just focusing on real estate. That's my main business and the main focus of kind of what I do daily. But that's not the only thing that makes us up. And I know as men, too often we put all of our value in what our careers or businesses are, but there's more to us than that. So I kind of start off, I had to kind of summarize who I am. I'm a husband, a father, a follower of Jesus, which is a very important topic. A lot of times, we don't share that enough. So I tell most people, is like, share more than what you just do, and share kind of like what your convictions are. So for me, my faith is huge, I'm a son, I'm a brother to my sisters, and colleague, friend, and so forth. Member of my church, and overall have certain values and ways of conducting my life I try to adhere to. By no means am I perfect. I have my own challenges that I kind of go through daily, I think it's important for us to have a network of support, either at home, through other groups or whatever. I don't think life is meant to be conducted on our own. I think we're designed to be creatures of, relationships. And it's so important for us to kind of like do what we're doing, kind of talking, interacting, and helping each other.
Yeah, that's why I love this topic, because no one's talking about this stuff, right? And I feel it's so important. So many people are struggling with living intentionally and what's like the meaning of life. How should I be spending my time? And so I know this topic matters to you. Why does this topic matter to you?
Well, when I first hear the word regret, it almost brings the idea of kind of sadness, disappointment, things potentially that have already happened in the past. And it's like now looking back on it, it's like I'm disappointed. But kind of like connecting that with my faith, I think it brings an element of repentance, because that's such a huge part of the Christian faith is repentance. Ultimately, we are imperfect creatures. We struggle, we face issues and challenges, We trip, fall, we make mistakes, we hurt people, and sometimes intentionally, sometimes not even intentionally.
Hmm.
We don't realize how we impact people in society and others. We may have cut a car off on the way to work in the morning. We didn't realize we may have caused an accident. How do we, we don't know everything that we do. So thankfully, in our faith, we've got a Father in our Creator who forgives us if we ask for forgiveness. But there's an element of regret for what we've done. So I think it's acknowledging our mistakes and asking for forgiveness. So, in terms of why it's important, I think there's a humbleness in realizing that we are not perfect and we make mistakes. And when we do, we have a chance to move forward in a better state of mind and move forward with kind of like a feeling of like, all right, I have acknowledged, I have asked that person, I have admitted my wrongs, and hopefully that person has forgiven me. Hopefully I can move forward in a better condition than I kind of start off with. But I don't think it's a one-time event either. Excuse me. I think it's something that we have to be conscious of. And another element of our faith is being in prayer and being in this constant relationship with God, where it's like, all right, like where in my life do I need to work on?
Hmm.
Where do I need to focus my attention on? Where am I struggling? How do I know I'm struggling? You know what I'm saying? Like, how do I know? Like, sometimes it's easy to determine if you're if you're sick because you feel it physically. But how do you realize you have a problem outside the physical element? If you have a problem of how you conduct yourself, how you're communicating, how you're affecting other people, I mean, it takes either a certain level of thinking, and really meditating, I believe, or other people are going to tell you straight up, hey, you're hurting me, hey,
Hmm.
like that was not acceptable, or whatever you did there really had a negative impact on me. So I think, yeah, again, it's one of those topics where I'm just talking this from top of mind as I'm kind of deep going into that particular question. But I mean, yeah, it's a deep. I think the more we talk about, it, the deeper it gets.
Absolutely. And I mean, it can be looked at as a negative, but it can also be looked at as a positive. Like, what can I learn? What lessons can I take? And how can I not live with regrets in the future? Right.
Hmm.
So, what does that look like for you? Like today, how to live without regrets going forward?
Yeah, I think thinking about regrets. I think stemming from myself. Do I have regrets? Are there things in my life where I can look back and say, well, like, why did I do that? Um, and that way I can make a correction and move forward in a different fashion. Um, in general, I don't know if it's just myself or more of a guy thing. Like, I kind of tend to be more on the positive side, more think that, hey, I'm doing good. I think I'm like in general like living within a certain lane. I'm not hurting people. I'm not stealing. I'm not doing anything outside the law. And my intentions are not like sneaky or anything like that. But is that it? I mean, I think we can go deeper and stuff. Like, have there been times where I've potentially hurt people? I think it may happen more around people that are closest to us, right? Because I think
Mm-hmm.
as we relate with people, we have a certain level we get to with just general people, friends, or colleagues, or just people in society where we're polite. We talk about things, we commune, but we don't get too close. I mean, to allow our emotions and feelings to get involved and
Right.
allow ourselves to get vulnerable, because that's where the real stuff happens, right?
Mm-hmm.
So because of that, we conduct ourselves in a certain proper way, and we think people. I mean, we think of ourselves. Hey, I'm helping people. I'm doing good. People look at me a certain in a certain way, so I think I'm good. But then those closest around us, I think, is a gauge. And for myself, being married with kids, I think those are the people that it impact the most and have the most effect, and they have the most effect on me
Right.
because we're in close proximity. And they're my family. So looking back in terms of regret, I think the most of, I mean, regrets, if I had to kind of like pinpoint, where I can see it's probably my loved ones, how I've potentially conducted myself with them. If it
Mm.
was time, if it was the quality of the time spent, it was something I didn't or did or didn't do, or certain things I perhaps said where it probably shouldn't have been said. I think those are probably the biggest areas. If I had to really, pinpoint regrets that I have, I could probably have um, done a better job. And that's something for me today to say, all right, how can I move forward in a better fashion? How can I be conscious of my actions that I can move forward in a better way? Not just be like, all right, I did a mistake again, the same thing over and over again, right? We don't want to get in this cycle of just making the same mistake and going spinning our tires, and it's like months turn into years, and then that regret gets even worse. It's like, well,
Right.
I'm like, once you identify a mistake, it's almost like, all right, are you gonna do something about it? And I think that's important for us to realize. All right, I mean, you can change, but the trajectory that you're on by doing something differently. I think we fall into a trap by expecting a change when we're not doing anything different, right?
Right.
Same actions, I mean, are not going to produce a different result. So, but sometimes we don't know. I think that's where we may struggle. It's like we don't know what else to do.
Hmm.
It's like I'm thinking this is what the best way to approach this issue or challenge, but it's not. There's no. I mean, and you maybe push harder or you talk louder, but nothing changes, right?
Hmm.
So then you sit down and you're like, you may feel trapped. But I think we have to realize there are other options. Maybe we have to seek them. And maybe we don't, but we potentially should.
Right. I think there's always a level of ignorance. Like we're always, with intentional living, we're trying to make the best decisions we know how to make today. And if we're growing as people, our intelligence, our knowledge is growing too, so that we will make better decisions as we grow. But I do think there's always a level of ignorance of, what can I be doing better? We don't always know. So I think like purposeful living, intentional living, like, trying to take steps, doing what we know. Um, I think that's very important to not live with as many regrets in the future. And also, like, you're a Christian, I'm a Christian, really staying in tune with God and really listening to what God is saying. God wants us to live without regrets. God wants us to live purposeful lives. God has a plan for us, and it's us that gets in the way of that. You know, um,
Yeah, 100%. As you're saying that, God speaks to us in many ways. I mean, He speaks to us through His Word, the Bible, through prayer, meditation, but also through other people. I think that's why it's important to be surrounded by other people who have a good, not only just good intentions, but they're in the same belief in the same wavelength as yourself. So for myself, if it's like a men's group at my church where we meet once a week, or where it's someone else in the same faith where they can hold me accountable, or someone I can go to just to have a conversation, open up. I think those are ways that God could speak to us through these individuals. And again, these are things that we have to kind of expose ourselves to and get involved in. We just can't expect to sit on the couch and just complain or just sit there sulking or just getting into more deeper sadness, or even depression because of the situation that we find ourselves in.
mhm. I imagine you're very intentional about your circle of influence.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to conduct ourselves with the realization that people are watching,
Mm.
our kids, family, coworkers. Now with the world of social media, the minute you put yourself out there, you've got thousands, if not millions of eyeballs watching you.
Right.
So how do you want people to view you? You know,
Mm.
and I mean, initially it's not that easy. Like how, people are afraid to put a camera on them, right? It's
Hmm.
not natural to walk around and have a camera. Initially, it was almost like you think, "Oh, like this can't be something that's going to happen for very long." But then, as years go by, it's like, no, this is it. This is the world that we live in. Now we're doing this whole Zoom thing. This is the normal way of society conducts itself. So now it's like, all right, I need to put myself out there for whatever business it is, because people want to. The only way they're going to learn about you and build an opinion on you is you put yourself out there. And then
Hmm.
once you do, I think there's a realm, a way of you conducting yourself that is a realness to it. So what I think what I'm trying to say is that people can read through the lines. I think if you're kind of like too scripted, if you're too polished, if you're too come across like a salesperson, um, there's no authenticity to it. It's too unreal because
Yeah,
we
it's
are
fake.
imperfect people, right? It's kind
That's
of
right.
fake, right? So I think people can read through that and they really appreciate just more the raw realness that we all are. They can relate. Say, oh, look, that person tripped up. They're not perfect every single time, right? They're not wearing a suit and tie every single time. They
Hmm.
coughed. Oh, okay, so they're not perfect. So but at the same time, I think we just realize, all right, people are watching us, so we need to just be aware of that. So it just keeps us on, that level of awareness longer and more often, instead of just kind of like just turning it off and just kind of doing whatever. Like, it just keeps us on, a little more focused and realizing that we are influencing people. Either, I mean, we may not realize it, but we are influencing anyone who watches us.
Hmm.
It could be a positive way, making people laugh, or inspiring people by motivating them with whatever you do, or it could do the opposite. So
Right.
I think, realizing that, and then just realize, okay, if I do a certain thing, how's my audience gonna receive that message, and is that the way I want them to receive it?
Hmm. And I think there's something interesting about that. Like vulnerability breeds vulnerability. Um, like I'm getting more comfortable doing this, but it was very uncomfortable when I started, and I said a lot of personal things because I want to be vulnerable because I want to impact people, right? And so, you know, last year was a terrible year, and I lost my reputation, lost everything, and so I'm like, well, I've got nothing left to lose, so why not be vulnerable and just tell people kind of the way it is. And people will love you for it, people will hate you for it, people will criticize you, right? And having thick skin and just accepting whatever comes of it, because that is the price you have to pay if you want massive impact, you know. And
Yes.
so, like, this is in my mind my best way of impacting people. um how else, like, in your opinion, can we impact people to live without regrets?
How can we live without regrets?
What how can we impact others to live without regrets?
That's a good question. So today on the drive, I had the radio tuned into a station. It's a Christian station, and it had someone speaking. And this person was in the armed forces, and he was kind of mentioning how he had gone through years of battles, and in the Middle East, and he came home, and his marriage was like really on the rocks, and even went to the point that he ended up cheating on his wife, and then they split up, and they were filing for divorce. And then he got to the really dark point where he's like, I was ready to take my life, bought a gun, and I was just planning how to just take my life. And he goes, it got to the point, and he goes, and it was interesting. I'm driving, listening to the story, and it got to the point where he had the gun in the closet, and there was a knock on the door, and it was actually his wife. They were split, and she was like, wanting to come in, and then he got angry at her for for disrupting his suicide moment type of thing, right?
Holy
And it
cow.
was like crazy. So he's like yelling at her, from the other side of the door. And then, finally she got to the point where she questioned him um, um, on his like kind of like you've done so much, in for your country, and why can't you do the same thing for your marriage and stuff, right?
Wow.
So it really kind of like took him a step back, and he's like, it was like a turning moment for him where he's like, she was calling him out, and he could have taken his life and it was over. But from that moment on, he talks about how he basically started this ministry where they went and they rescued 17,000 people from the Middle East over the last like I don't know 7-8 years. It was crazy to just hear the story. I'm
Who
driving for
was
about
it? Who
40
is
minutes.
it?
I can't remember the individual's name. I could probably look it up. But it was on Focus on the Family today on the radio,
Okay.
and it was just such an inspiring story because this guy, like, he fought for his country for years. He went, I think, it was 3 different rounds or 3 different times he had gone and fought for the country, and then his life ended up pretty much down the drain and ready to take his life. And then just in a moment, he was able to kind of like turn the corner, and then he started this ministry, and with a few other men, they basically realized, hey, we've got so many people who helped us who are still there, like people who live there, like those Middle Easterns who live among the Taliban and stuff, who are being persecuted, who are being tortured, who are being killed. So they basically unsanctioned, from the U.S. kind of military, they went, they got some support from certain countries to get like airplane stuff. But over the course of so many years, they just rescued tens of thousands of people. And he goes, looking back, it's like, I mean, I could have ended my life. And then those people, because even the host said, if you'd killed yourself, there was probably no one else that could have done what you've done. Because
Wow.
it's not like there's another group doing what you're doing since,
Right.
right? So now think of the impact that you've had going forward. It could have ended and you were done. Your family would have been sad, devastated. But then, then their lives would have continued. Who knows in what kind of very challenging situation. But those people that lives you've impacted, the thousands of people that lives you've physically saved, he goes, think about that. And, it was just a very encouraging message that it wasn't like it went very deep. Like this guy was willing to take his life. So it impacted me saying, I don't know what my future holds, right? So whatever regret or situation that I find myself in today, there's hope for the future to be better,
Mm,
right?
that's
I
cool.
think for anyone listening, is like wherever you find yourself, you can be here, here, here. There's always room for growth, and the future can be better. That's the beauty about hope. And ultimately, as a believer in Jesus, we have that ultimate hope that, listen, this life can bring us in the ruins financially, physically. We can end up dying and stuff, right? and
Hmm.
and, and poverty. But then what? We have this eternal hope, thankfully, that we've got a future in heaven with our Savior, where there's no more pain and suffering. So that's the ultimate hope. But even in this life here, we've got this hope that we don't know what the future holds, right?
Mm.
Have you ever heard of? I've heard some of these messages where people have tried to commit suicide and then they actually didn't die. And they're like, one guy was sharing stories like, the minute I jumped, I realized, oops, this was a bad mistake, right? And then they land, and then for whatever reason he didn't die. So now he's like looking back, he's like, man, he goes, I'm thankful he didn't die. But like in that moment, I was thinking, this is it. This is the only thing that I could my only way out, my only hope of kind of just stopping whatever um, pain and suffering he was going through. But then as soon as he jumped, it was like, ooh, this was a bad choice type of thing, right? So it makes you wonder, all these people who have committed a suicide. It's like, I mean, if they really thought about it, like if they really realized
Mm.
what the potential for their future, you
Mm.
know, could have been,
Yep.
I'm like, that's really something that resonates with me, because I look back at my younger years, like, I mean, have I made mistakes? Yes. There was phases where I was just very selfish and just thinking of myself. I can look back at early 20s where I was just really looking for like, fun and very temporal enjoyment type of thing. And whether if it was like just partying or women, all this kind of temporary stuff that wasn't very deep or lasting stuff, right? But
Mm-hmm.
then I can remember like in those years thinking like, well, you know what? I This is it. This is the best life can get.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? It's like thinking back, well, why would I want to like work hard and do all this, struggling? Because you look back and I look back, my parents, it's like, wow, they had to support three kids. They had to, they had to work long hours for many years. And I'm like, well, is that what life's all about? I didn't think there was really that much more that could have been because I'm thinking of this temporary pleasure, enjoyment that I was experiencing. And it was like, all right, it was good. And whatever I tried or whatever I did, it was moments of pleasure or moments of enjoyment. But then what? Then I think that, all right, I'm looking for the next Saturday and I'm looking for
Yeah.
the next week and the next weekend because I guess,
Honestly, I think living for the weekends is one of the biggest ways to live with regrets.
yeah, 100% looking back.
Yeah.
And then it was probably a 4 or 5 window from about 20 to 25 when I was in that phase. And it got to the point where I'm like, this can't be it. This is even before I'm a Christian. So this is before I surrendered my life to the Lord, where I was like questioning, I'm like, I'm getting tired of this because it's like, all right, the same round, the same kind of environment, the same kind
Yeah.
of people and things. So I kind of stopped and slowed down and kind of stepped away from that. And from that, it wasn't easy because now what? I didn't have a different set of friends. I didn't have a really different set of
Mm-hmm.
routines. So it took time to kind of change my environment and change how I conducted myself. But really was God intervening and really had to really kind of redirect my life through an encounter after encounter. And then for me, it was an actual physical experience at one moment, which really, convicted me to the point where there's no question that God is real and, and the plans he has in store for us. So, and that's a whole other story. But the point is, I can see how, at that time, 2025, thinking this is it, and now looking forward, like 25 years from that, I'm 45 now. It's like, wow, the last 20 years, I would never imagine my life to be where it is today. You know,
Wow.
married, kids, living in a different country, in real estate. Like, I didn't go to school for this. No one I knew was in real estate. It wasn't something like I really could imagine. But now it's like just it's amazing. It's really kind of like miraculous
And
to
and
how I
you're
got here.
and you're happy, right? You're living a fulfilled life, right?
Yes, and that's the thing, and fulfillment, like 180 from where I was before, but there's definitely, the flesh where it's like, are we satisfied? So
Mm-hmm.
that's like even fulfillment is something to kind of question. What does that mean? When are we full enough? Because the flesh, wants more and more. Like I eat today, like I eat in the morning, I'm hungry later on, so I need more fulfillment physically.
You know what?
What's that?
I heard this from someone, I don't remember who. I think it was from Ravi Zacharias. Said the thing that breeds depression the most is too much pleasure in your life.
Mm.
Too much pleasure makes you depressed. Isn't that crazy?
Right. If you stop and think about it, it's like, really? Like even yesterday on the drive with my kids, I'm like, do you know rich people, like a lot of them are not happy? And they're like, like I'm a 9-year-old, a 10-year-old, I mean, a line a 12-year-old. They're like, what do you mean? I'm like, guys, I mean, money doesn't automatically make you happy. They're like, really? I said, I mean, there's plenty of people who've got money and they committed suicide. We were having this conversation last night because I think the idea is out there like, well, if you've got money and you can do whatever you want, you should be happy and stuff, right?
Yeah.
That's not always the case, is it?
Money doesn't change you here or here, right? If you're struggling with like negative thoughts or any kind of mental disorder, money doesn't change that.
Right.
Money actually makes it worse because now you have all this money and you realize, oh shit, that didn't do it. Now you're even more depressed because now you don't know what's going to do it, right? Very
Yes.
cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, that is awesome. And I believe that God wants us all to live massive, impactful lives. Like I believe that, and the only thing that holds us back from that is I think ourselves and making bad decisions and not living the life that God wants us to live. And I've used this analogy a couple of times now where imagine that you've lived your life full of regrets and you die and you meet God and then he turns you around to show you the life he actually had for you, and that is a life you didn't live at all because you got in your own way. Yeah, I
Right.
mean, who wants to experience that, right? Because at the end of the day, this life is short. And I mean, I could be gone next week, you could be gone next week, right?
Yes.
And going back to impact, the main people we have to impact is our family, and those are the very hardest people to impact because they see all of our faults, right?
100%. Hundred
All of
percent.
our faults. And so I know I'm trying to live intentionally with my children, trying to be a very intentional father, trying to be there for them, lead them. I'm actually reading a book called Seasons of Fatherhood right now, and it's absolutely awesome. How it explains the importance of a father, which in this feminist culture now, you know, fathers have no purpose, no use, right?
Right.
But that is not how God designed it. The father leads the family, whether people like that or not. That's how God designed it. And
Mm-hmm.
so the role of the father is a very, very important role with a ton of responsibility because whether you take that responsibility or not, you will be held accountable for how you raised your family.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to look back and have regrets that I didn't spend enough time with my children. No one looks back and says, I wish I spent less time with my family, right? No one wishes that. And so that's one of the ways that I'm trying to live without regrets myself. My dad wasn't around a lot for us as kids. And, we were working on the farm and he was busy and that sort of thing. And so I want to make sure that I'm very intentional. And it's amazing because people say they don't have time, right? People say they don't have time, but it's not a time thing. It's a priority thing.
100%. We all got 24 hours in a day. So what do we do with our 24 hours?
And it's amazing because if you actually wrote down what you did with your time, like every hour, what am I doing? Like, actually shut the TV off, right? Shut the TV off. You'd be amazed. Suddenly you're bored and you can do stuff, right? I think the less time we can spend on screens, the less regrets we'll have because
Mm-hmm.
it's a time sucker. It's it screws us up mentally, like comparing. Like
Yep.
okay,
Yep.
I have a failed business from last year, right? I'm in recovery mode right now, survival mode,
Yep.
and yet okay, I'm looking at your posts. I'm looking at all these other people's posts. You had an amazing 2022. Well, how does that make me feel, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we want to compare. We want to compare with the absolute most extreme thing we see. I don't want to compare with someone else who had a crappy year. I want
Right.
to compare myself to the very best, and then that only brings you down more, and it actually keeps you from taking more action. So,
It could be a vicious cycle. I mean, we are all susceptible to that. It's like, what are we allowing into our lives to influence us? And we have to all be aware of it. If it's what we're watching, who we're talking to, what we're reading, all this will affect us. So it's one thing to read something or watch something and say that motivates me more to move forward in the right direction versus that's taking me the opposite direction and
mm,
that's slowing me down and making me feel even more worthless
mm,
and and maybe even giving up on whatever effort I was trying to do. So that is really important. So that idea of intentionality is huge. We have to be aware of that. What are we doing with our time and what is affecting us? Like again, who are we speaking with? What are we watching? And you're right. A lot of what we watch is is being internalized. It's
mm,
one thing to have a conversation and then you say something. I'm like, what? Like that is like a more direct approach versus just consuming it with through media and through a screen. I mean, it's happening at such a rapid pace
Mm,
and so often, much more than talking and even reading, right? That it's probably scrambling ourselves in not in the right way. So
mm,
I think slowing down or putting the phone and the devices down more often is probably not a bad idea. And connecting with people, having deeper conversations, reading better material, and getting do experiencing life more with family, with real friends, serving. There's so many ways that we can allow ourselves to spend our time and do things that will influence us in a much better way.
mm.
Because a lot of what we compare ourselves with has to do with money, but are we comparing ourselves with people who are doing other things like impacting people's lives, changing people's lives? I think those are the influences. And a lot of times it has nothing to do with money. There's many stories of people going into other countries and just impacting people. On my wife's side, she's somehow related with Nick Vujicic. Do you know Nick Vujicic? No arms and no legs. So you may have
I
seen him on,
have seen him.
yeah, you may have seen him social media. So he's born with no arms and no legs. And he's got a crazy testimony where, like, he wanted to give up because imagine going through school, being bullied,
Of
and how much
course.
worth he probably felt like worthless because he had to be served with everything. Imagine having no arms and no legs. But
You have
now,
no independence, right?
no independence. You always need someone to help you to do anything, right?
Yeah.
But now to see the level of impact he has in the world, he speaks in front of millions and millions of people. He's on stages with presidents of nations. He's spoken to like, I mean, I think he's spoken to like multiple dozens of country leaders, and the events that he speaks at are literally in the millions, and they're all over the world. And he literally sits there preaching the gospel, talking about his story and stuff with no arms, no legs. It's just unbelievable to kind of see this individual where he was and where he is today, how God's used him, but how he's allowed God to use them. Like it's
Mm,
one thing that we all have potential. We all
right.
have potential to do so much. What's holding us back? You said it earlier. Most of the time, it's ourselves.
Mm,
We are holding ourselves kind of hostage from doing our purpose, probably because we're scared, probably because we're concerned about what other people think about us, probably we're worried about like getting pushback or hearing just negatively or dealing with hostility and stuff. um, or it could just be like we're preoccupied in certain things that we probably shouldn't really be so much preoccupied with, right?
mm,
But if we can break free of that and allow God to use us, and really push in that direction, then we can impact millions of people like this, like Nikki. Like he's just a regular guy, you know. And when I first met him, like he was in a wheelchair and stuff, I'm like, oh, okay. I thought he was just like, just someone in the family. And then I find out who he is. I'm like, wow, speaking in front of like, yeah, millions of people, having such tremendous impact. It's just amazing to see that. So if he can do it, I'm like, why can't we be able to do stuff like that?
of course.
We have this
Wo-
potential. We all have this potential. We all have so much potential.
That is amazing because the impact, the accomplishments, it's up here, right? It's up here how we impact people. That's amazing. Do you think he would be willing to come on this podcast?
I mean, who knows? It may just,
That would be amazing.
yeah, you just never know. I mean, at the end of the day, um, just, you know, just thinking about who we impact. Like sometimes people reach out to me, and I'm not like some social media guru,
Mm,
but every once in a while, someone would DM and say a message, thank you for what you said or what you did or what you shared to help me. And that's kind of that's a great kind of like feeling to know, hey, someone heard or saw me or listened to me or I helped them.
yeah.
I mean, listen, we all have this opportunity around us. I think it's just instead of just doing things for the sake of doing them, maybe just having more clarity and just doing it with just letting go of the fears that we have, and realizing there's people out there who need to hear this,
Mm,
who just need this message, whatever that message is, for you with this podcast, you never know who's going to listen to it today, January 26, 2023, or they're going to listen to this message in 5 or 10 years from now. Because, I was scrolling through YouTube. I found this video from way back when, and it's like, that was that's an interesting that was an interesting video. Like that was an interesting conversation that Alex had. I mean, he brought up some questions that like I never really kind of thought about. Similar to that podcast I listened to today on the radio,
Mm.
it was like this guy talking about his life, where he was, as a soldier, and then he almost lost his life, and then ruined marriage, and then all of a sudden, like fast forward to today, and he's saved 17,000 people. It's like what? That's like it's amazing, right?
It really is.
It really is. And it's just like, hey, he even said it, I'm just a regular guy. It's not like I was born in any special circumstance, but I allowed God to use me. I kind of like let go of all these things that were kind of holding me back.
Mm.
And then, I just took these steps. And a lot of times we guys take these steps of faith because we don't know what the future holds. We don't know we're going to die next week, next year, and 50 years from now. But, you know, let's do what we can do, right?
I love that.
And at the end of the day, we can take the next step, and then the next step, and then just continue to just give it to God. Listen, I have limited abilities. You have limitless abilities. Let me know. Is this the step you want me to take? All right, I'm gonna take one more step, and each step is really in faith.
Mm. Wow. So, how would you live any different if you had 12 months left? If you knew you only had 12 months left, what would you do any different?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I mean, obviously, you kind of like put on hold any of this kind of like work stuff, like
Mm.
monetary kind of work. I would want to spend more time with my family. Say, all right, I got 12 months to live. I want to spend as much time with them, but then really come together with them and say, well, is there something that I can physically still do? If I still had my health, but I knew I was going to expire in 12 months, so what can I do that will benefit them, help them, and potentially other people? So I think I don't have the answer right now. I think it would take some really deep reflection and prayer, and to really say, God, I'm like, I mean, I don't have much time. What's the best use of my time? Yes, I want to spend time with my loved ones, but what are we doing? We're just
Mm.
sitting on the couch? No. What could we do together that's going to really benefit them and those around us and maybe other people? And maybe it's some kind of ministry that we start. Maybe
Mm.
it's something where it's impactful. It has to be,
That's super
something that
cool.
something that's a start. And it's unfortunate, but a lot of times these uh, missions or um, uh, um, a lot of time what I'm trying to say is like people start things after an experience, and a
Mm.
lot of times the negative scares, like a health scare or someone dies. So now we started this ministry, or we started this campaign or whatever it is. I mean, why does it have to start after something like that? Why can't it start before? And perhaps because we tend to be selfish
Mm.
creatures, and we tend to want just things for us. So we're just focused on us too often. And that's such a small world that we live in. We're just focused internally only on myself, my world, my selfishness. I want this, I want that.
Right.
Meanwhile, if we turn it around and now we focus on other people, now that impacts a wider audience to affect, and it's limitless, right? Like
Yep.
if you point your arms in different directions, like it's going to go in infinity. But if you're pointing within, it just stops right here, type of thing, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of what comes to mind. With a limited time that potentially we have, how we can help others.
And honestly, when you know you've impacted someone for the better, nothing feels better than doing that in the world.
Right.
Like that feeling, that's all you want to do, right? Wow.
Yes.
Thomas, I know you're on a time crunch. Man, This
This
has
was
been
good.
awesome. This
This was
was
good.
really good,
I mean,
dude.
yeah, I love it. As we start, the more we talk about this, things just start opening up. Because again, this is not one of those regular conversations that you just have, pick up with a client or something. It takes time to get to this level of conversation, just flushing out just a regular chit chat. But I can remember, when I first became a Christian before I got married, where like I'd be talking to some friends for hours and be like, "What time is it? It's 1 o'clock in the morning, right?" Because it takes time to get through just the normal chit chat, how's work, how's life, and stuff. But then like you get on these deeper conversations
Yeah.
and really start analyzing your life, really analyzing what you're doing with your time, really kind of set, all right, am I prioritizing? Are my priorities in place? Or
Mm,
how can I do better? What do you do? What do you think I should do? And then, you kind of like sharpen each other a little bit. And then you know what I'm saying? Like iron sharpens iron. And that's why it's so important to have someone that you can help each other. Because I mean, if we're on our own, it's just more of an internal thing. It doesn't really get flushed out.
right.
And then if you have someone else, you feel like, hey, I'm helping, and they're helping. So there's a helping element that you just mentioned a few minutes ago that we want to feel useful. We want to
Mm,
feel like we have value, not just take, take, take. And I think that's the thing. The selfishness of just taking, it'll end up affecting us. We may not realize it as we're just taking cookies from the cookie jar, but at some point, our internally, it's like you're just a selfish person. You're just a taker. Meanwhile, if you reverse it and you give, that is an element of like, hey, I'm thinking of other people. I'm giving back, and like you said earlier, it's like you feel better. You feel good. You know what I'm saying?
mm-hmm,
It's not just about you. It's about other people.
mm-hmm. Wow. Thomas, I'm honored, man. I'm honored to have you on here. This is amazing,
This was great. Thank you.
dude.
Thank you for having me. I wish the best with this podcast, Alex, and happy to come back anytime in the future. But
Cool.
yeah, this was good. I wish you the best, my friend.
And if anyone wants to find you, contact you, where can they find you?
I mean, Instagram, Facebook are probably the two easiest places. I mean, I'm not too difficult to reach. I think a quick Google search, and you can find out very easily.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you.